All right, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Tech Tuesday. My name is Jolene Langlinais. I'm a full stack engineer at Clause, and this is Diana Lease.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana Lease. I also work at Clause. I'm the lead front-end engineer. I'm excited to share some knowledge with you all today.
Yeah, so we've been partnering with Women Who Code for a little bit now, and we wanted to do this Tech Tuesday to kind of set the groundwork around our involvement in open source and try to get people more involved in open source, especially with Hacktoberfest coming up. And so this will kind of lead into a webinar that we're doing, and we'll be talking about open source and what is it and why you should care. So to go straight into it, open source is imagining, proprietary software that a company owns, but no company owns it. It's able to be used by anybody in the public sphere. So they usually fall under certain licensing stipulations. So Apache, MIT license, you might have heard of those before. But it basically means that there's some code that's accessible by anybody that anyone can come and put in a pull request to contribute to or voice their opinion on, and they can also use it, not just contributing. So there's a lot of things that you may use that are open source, such as Python or GitLab, and probably a lot of other examples. Do you have anything to add to that, Diana?
Yeah, that sounds great. I think, yeah, like Jillian said, there's a lot of things out there that maybe you didn't know were open source that are open source. And then there's also, we think of open source as being, not for profit. Someone's just putting code out there for other people to use. But a lot of for-profit companies also place a high emphasis on open source software. So if you think about Facebook, how they have the React core team developing React, which is open source. And yeah, Jolene and I are lucky enough to be at a company where they do put a high emphasis on open source software, and we get to work on open source projects during our day job, which is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it also, another thing to keep in mind is that it's not just about products, it's also about building communities. React is a really good example of how it's not just this development product or software library, it's also this whole ecosystem of, there's tons of communities and conferences that are all based around React. So it kind of has its self-perpetuating system. So I want to talk a little bit about why I should care as a developer or a manager or someone with more administrative oversight. I think that our use case is a good example to kind of demonstrate where the importance comes into play. So we work on the core project, which is the open source project that Clause is very highly invested in. And it's based around creating tools in an ecosystem around smart legal agreements. So you can think of legal tech and automating contracts in a smart contract kind of fashion. And so there's a lot of ways for you as a developer that you can care, but also as a manager. So as someone kind of putting your proprietary hat on as a manager or as a CEO or anything like that, then you care about these open source projects because they lay the groundwork for, again, going back to React as an example, of further perpetuating a kind of cycle of that is the standard for whatever it is that you're doing. So a core project, we're trying to make the standard for what a smart legal agreement looks like, similar to how React, in some way, shape, or form, is setting the standard for how developers make single-page applications and how the developmental life cycle works. So I think there's a lot to be said for the managerial perspective of wanting to invest in something that pays dividends in and of itself. And then from a developer's perspective, there's, I would say, even more reason to be involved, such as it gives you experience in technologies that you may not otherwise be exposed to. You also get to pad or provide experience into your resume and your portfolio by having very transparent, traceable code contributions to an open source project. Because open source is transparent and anyone can look at it, you can very easily point to, I made this feature or I made this change. So both in a kind of introspective, kind of selfish, healthy sense of selfishness way, it's beneficial. And even on a managerial level, then it behooves you to invest in something that will pay you back in the end. Diana, do you have anything that you would add to that?
No, I think that sounds great. I'd love to talk a little bit about what you as an individual can bring to open source software. So I think a lot of people are, especially new developers, can be a little wary of contributing to open source, or maybe they don't know, if they can contribute something meaningful to a project. But I think kind of the beauty of open source is that you can contribute where you feel like you can add value, and you can add code that around frameworks or technology that you feel comfortable with, or as Jolene said, technology that you want to work with or learn more about. So I think I know us at the Accord project, which I think I mentioned in the Women Who Code blog posts that we recently did, is that we really don't feel like any contribution is too small. And I think there's a lot of open source projects that also feel this way. So I think when you're approaching open source software and thinking about if there's something you can bring to it, really just think about what you're good at, and if there's something in the project that could use your expertise. So whether if you're good at grammar and spelling, maybe that's even just, looking at a README and going through and fixing typos. Or if you're really good at testing, adding a test case. If you have experience with like converting class components in React to functional components that use hooks, go out and see which open source libraries use React, and see if any have older components that could use refactoring. So I think when you're approaching open source, really just think about like what interests you and what you're good at, and then go from there. Yeah, and then also, even if you're coming from a background in another field besides tech, you can also look for projects that kind of intersect with those different industries. So as Jolene said, we're focused at Accord project on legal tech. So a lot of people who are contributing to the Accord project, whether they're contributing code or not, there's a lot who also just have a background in law and have legal expertise. So they can come in and contribute their knowledge in those areas. We have a Slack group where we have, not just developers, but also lawyers who engage in our conversations and in our weekly meetings to bring something to the table. Jolene, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would also kind of reframe it in a way of, you could also take a more holistic approach to what it is that you're contributing. Because what you're contributing isn't just going to be code or code changes or documentation changes. There's a whole plethora and ecosystem that goes around managing and maintaining a open source software base. And that comes from triaging issues to even just weighing in, voting on, things that the technical steering committee will come up with, or responding to people's questions and issues because you've been keeping track of what's been going on. There's a lot of things that you can do that's a little bit more indirect. Similarly, you can also be a part of the process that is setting up kind of the sponsorship of the self-funding process for open source projects. A lot of open source projects will use GitHub sponsors, or I think there's another one called Open Collective. That takes overhead for someone or someone's to contribute to. And there's also, so there's a lot of different ways that you can participate and get more familiarized with what's going on. And so in that kind of vein, I would like move on a little bit to more of a career perspective of, you're interested in open source and maybe you don't currently feel like you have the capacity or the opportunity to be working on it. You know, granted, as Diana said earlier, is that we're very fortunate to work with a company that does place a high value on open source contribution. But so I would talk a little bit about how you would make the case to your employer or even your employees, if you're a manager level, of why you should contribute or why you should invest in us contributing, if depending on which perspective you're looking at. So I think that this goes back to why you should care about open source. I think that it's a lot easier. I mean, for sure, it's a lot easier to make the case to contribute to open source if it's something that your company is already using within its tech stack. So for example, a part of our tech stack within Clause, we use a library for a text editor, which is called Slate. And it's a pretty big library. A lot of people use it. And we also invest a little bit of time into working on Slate because we know that it will pay dividends for us because we use that product in our proprietary product. And so I think that making that case to your employer is a really good thing to get in the habit of doing. So being familiarized with what open source projects that you do use on a day-to-day basis, even if it's a small scale one, you can still make an argument for, you know, spending, even if it's an hour a week on company time to contribute to open source. That's you know, infinitely more than zero. And similarly, if it's your employees or if your teammates or yeah, anyone within your organization that you're trying to convince to contribute, then I think it takes the same kind of tack, but you're trying to make more of a case of like why an employee should really help themselves by contributing and broadening their breadth of expertise into the skills that it takes to contribute to open source, whether it comes to collaboration, transparency, documentation, self-documentation. Because open source is transparent and anyone can look at it, there's a strong emphasis on documentation and leaving a breadcrumb trail for other people to follow. And that's skills that will, again, pay for itself in employees if they are able to adopt that, then bringing those into your company and into your teams. Dana, do you have anything you would add to that?
Yeah, that sounds great. I would just add kind of, in our case, we really focus on making the Accord project the standard for legal technology. And I think as Clause, we want to be using something that is considered the standard. And you can't really create something that is a standard if just one party is using it. So, you know, putting work into open source helps you, you know, get input from other parties and really have that kind of technology that other people are using and can eventually become the standard that is used in the industry. Great. So I kind of want to go on the other end of that spectrum of, as opposed to doing open source work at your day job, why you might contribute outside of work, especially if you aren't employed right now, or if you're looking for work. Open source is a great way to kind of get code out there in the public that you can show on interviews or to hiring managers. I know something that's really difficult for developers is that you write all this code at your job, and then you know you can't show it outside of your job, right? Because it's proprietary. So open source is a great way to kind of, you know, not just learn from others and practice your skill. It's also great because you have something to show for it. Do you have anything to add, Jolene?
Yeah, I would add the importance of community building and also just knowledge transfer and open collaboration. So to kind of use a metaphor, I used to be in culinary. I used to be a chef, and so I use culinary references all the time. And one of my favorite ones is applies very well to this is that pre-1980s, all famous kitchens and chefs were very secretive about their recipes and their methods and their techniques. And they always kind of thought that if we share those things, then everyone else will take over, you know, and they'll be left by the wayside. But what ended up happening is in the 1980s, there was a lot of skill share, and chefs or sous chefs would move around between kitchens a lot, and also just stage at other kitchens, which means basically an internship. Um, and what ended up happening was that the entire industry as a whole was raised up in terms of the quality of output and the quality of work. Um, and it didn't have that apocalyptic kind of vibe to it that people feared when they were holding so tightly to their secrets. And in the same way, things are always made better when you openly collaborate. So I think that there is a strong incentive to be a part of these communities and to share your knowledge with other people, because it's generally regarded as a moral thing to do. It helps you because one of the best ways to learn is by teaching. And it also helps you because there's that many more people to teach you what they already know. And I think it also goes hand in hand with advice that a lot of people in this industry give, is that you want to be kind of networking and exposing yourself to a lot of different people in different fields or in different companies. And that is a really fundamental way to do that. Is it's built into the system. You don't necessarily need to go to a lot of events or a lot of conferences. It's built into the system that is the open source project, because it attracts people all around the globe. Yeah, and I think that kind of relatively sums up what we're trying to talk about here and why you should care about open source. And this, again, like I said at the beginning, kind of sets the stage for what our webinar is going to be like at the end of September, which is it's going to be about how to contribute to open source. And we're looking to do this at the end of September, specifically because it's right at the beginning of Hacktoberfest, and that can kind of help everybody get more comfortable and more confident in contributing and participating in Hacktoberfest, or just in open source overall. And that's going to be on the 28th of September, and you can find the event on Women Who Code's events or digital link. And yeah, Diana, do you have anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think I just hope that this made people excited to contribute to open source and kind of get a feel of why you might want to. And yeah, in our webinar, we'll have kind of more concrete details on how to get involved.
We'll also kind of be segueing at the very end into the open source project that we specifically work on. So if you're interested in legal tech, or if you're interested in contributing to an open source base, open source code base, wow, okay, then, and you don't know which one to contribute to, this could be a good step for you, or a good first option. And so it's going to segue into a call that we'll have after the webinar that's a part of the core project. It'll kind of be an overall summary and synopsis of the code base and the tech stack, so that you can kind of get a grip as to how to approach what you want to contribute to, or what you want to work on or look at. So yeah, we really thank you for watching this video, and hope to see you at the webinar. All right, thanks.